So my talk will be about, well, it's basically not a talk. It's a demo about the course. So I co-authored a brand new open source intelligence course. It's a 6-day course, which you can follow and learn all about open source intelligence. It builds upon the SEC587 course, which is open source intelligence gathering and analysis. That's the fundamentals course. And this course is basically taking it a little bit more advanced. We talk about how to pull API information, how to grab other information. So all kinds of pieces of interesting information that you may want to be aware of. So we go into the darknet, we talk about operation security, we talk about bias, we talk about disinformation, fake news. So basically 6 days of awesome content. But I'm a little bit biased because I'm one of the authors. So who am I? For those who do not know, I am Nico Dekens. I'm one of your co-chairs for today. So after the break, Matt Edmondson will join. He's based in the US. I'm based in Europe, in the Netherlands. I have a background in Dutch government, Dutch law enforcement, where I basically spent almost 2.5 decades practicing open source intelligence, tracking down terrorists, tracking down pedophiles, criminals, arms dealers, you name it, I've basically done it. I'm also, with something I'm pretty proud of, I'm one of the co-founders of the Osint Curious project, and I briefly worked at Bell & Cat as well. But hey, enough about me. This is not about me. This is about a course demo. And this demo will do a introduction in what you can expect from the SEC587 course. In this case, we're going to discuss the topic called Aviation Osint. So why do you want to track an aircraft? Well, it really depends. So if we tie it back to, for example, to Christina Licati's talk, you may be interested in tracking an aircraft because it's a high placed figure or a person of interest that has a high net worth. But if we tie it back into what's currently going on in the world, you may also want to track down those private jets that those Russian oligarchs have, for example, or maybe a conflict area. So there are numerous ways where you, as an open source intelligence investigator, want to be aware of, hey, where's this plane coming from? Where's this plane going to? Or not necessarily a plane, could also be a hot air balloon or a helicopter. So basically anything that flies, you can track them. You can track them with techniques that I'm going to discuss in just a moment, but sometimes we do not even need the tools that I will discuss, but you can also simply use your eyes to at least do an assessment on that specific plane. So when we are interested in an aircraft, we generally start with looking at the details on the aircraft. So who owns the aircraft? Who flies the aircraft? Who are the pilots? Where did it come from? Where is it going through? Maybe historically, but also sometimes it's interesting to know where it will go, let's say a couple of days from now. So to have that situational awareness on, hey, it met with in this country a week ago, and now it's here again. So maybe there's a merger coming up because we can also see similar jets from high net worth people in the same rough area. So we can use this information very often in real time or in near real time to find information about basically any aircraft, mostly commercial aircrafts. And well, sometimes you can also find information on non-commercial aircrafts. So where do you start? What's your starting point when it comes to finding information on something that flies in the sky that you can see with binoculars? Well, if you take out your binoculars, for example, you could, for example, see those aircraft registration numbers. So also known as, well, I think most people will know it better as a tail number. So those are those unique numbers that are basically required by law since, well, I think late 40s, that most planes will have them. So it will tell you, the first part will tell you a little bit about the country of origin, and the last part is basically that unique number for that specific aircraft. And as you can see on this example, it's not limited to a plane. It could be something that will go out into space orbit, or a hot air balloon or a helicopter. So people really have that misconception that we can only do aircraft tracking from an open source intelligence perspective when it comes to a plane, which is absolutely not true. basically anything that can fly in the sky needs a form of registration nowadays. Could even be a drone, for example. So we need to look for those unique numbers to find more information about that specific aircraft. So it could be the official owner or other details that we can look at. But sometimes it's also good to simply understand a little bit more about those registration numbers. They have that unique alphanumeric prefix where the registration numbers are issued by the country. So in this case, we have a specific country code and then a specific set of characters after that that will show you, hey, that's the unique number in essence for this particular aircraft. So for Botswana, it will start with A2 dash, and for Oman it will be A40 dash, and then that unique number where that aircraft is coming from. And we can look those up in the database, which is something that we will discuss later. Now notice that sometimes it's hard to read those tail numbers. This is why, for example, you will see that in the United States, the letters I and O, you will not find them because it could also be interpreted as a 1 and a 0. So those are things that you may want to be aware of. For example, if you're doing some plane spotting near an airport, which a lot of people have as a side hobby, that you want to be aware of that if you check a tail number, that a I or an O could be a 1 or a 0. This is why you very often will not see that on planes. But the main message here is, if you want to look up a plane, look for the tail number. First letter or letters will tell you something about the region of origin, and then the last digits will tell you something about that unique aircraft that you are now viewing. So if we're going to identify an aircraft, we can simply use our eyes. We can make an assessment, and we can simply take some time to see, hey, what's unique? What are those unique identifying labels? Well, for example, for this plane. So we can see small little details like a flag of origin pointed out at 1, so that nation flag. We can see that specific tail number pointed out at 2, that also tells us a little bit about the location of the engines. And that by itself, the placing of those engines can tell us something about the make and model of that plane or its capabilities. Now, you will also notice that sometimes the wingspan or the wings themselves pointed out at 5 can be pretty unique for that specific aircraft. And that by itself may be something that you want to take a note of, because sometimes you will find the same aircraft, but maybe it's newly painted, and you can still then try to do a side-by-side comparison and identify if that's still the same aircraft, because that's something that I have been seeing, for example, in, let's say, Latin American regions where they paint over planes that traffic drugs, so cocaine, for example, or other goods. Now, notice that some planes also will show you something about the aviation company. So basically the company that owns it. So painted logos or graphics or writing that, again, could be something that's pretty unique for that plane. And also notice that in this case, the plane has some very unique wheels. That landing gear itself could be something that's fairly unique for that specific aircraft. So there's a lot of information to simply take a look at and ingest, but more importantly, to take note of, because that's what we do in open source intelligence. As soon as we find something new that may be a pivot point or a new lead to our investigation, we take note of all of those small little details, because we do not know when they become useful later in our investigation, or how we can corroborate them in our investigative steps to address those intelligence requirements. So let's say you did an assessment on the plane. You noted all the things, you noted them down. Your next step could, for example, is to simply look up who owns this particular aircraft. So every aircraft has a particular individual or an organization that owns the plane and or operates that plane. That simply counts for every aircraft that we come across around the world. So sometimes it's good for you as an investigator to understand who is the factual owner or what the purpose of that particular aircraft may be. Now, keep in mind that each individual country is responsible for recording those registrations. So the information may be freely available, but sometimes you need to pay a little bit of money to get access to those databases. For example, you may want to look at SkyTamer or airlineupdate.com to find information that has been collected on civil aviation authorities of most countries. But well, there may be some countries where you have a little bit of challenge to find that information, but skytamer.com and airlineupdate.com may give you interesting information. For example, if we take a look at this register, this result, showing that in this case, we have information about the manufacturer. We learn a little bit about the make and model about this particular aircraft. We can see the amount of engines, and we can also see when this aircraft was first registered and in what country it was first registered. We can see the year of manufacturing, but interestingly, what we can also see pointed out at 5 and 7 in essence is that we can see the registration holder and the registered operator, which in this case are the same, but those things can be different. So we can have someone who is the holder of the registration, or maybe a different company or a different individual is the actual operator of that aircraft. So that's something that you definitely want to check out, because that can be, again, that small little nugget that you are looking for that helps you pivot into a different direction using all the tools that you have in your open source intelligence toolkit and your methodologies and flowcharts to take those additional steps to find information. Now, when it comes to aircrafts, we are not limited to only planes. So in some countries, and definitely not all of them, people must register their unmanned aircrafts, also known as drones, so UAS. So for example, if you take a look at my country, if you buy a commercial drone that's just over 260 grams, you need to register it with that proper authorities in the Netherlands. Now, that may be vastly different in Germany or in France or in Australia or in the United States, but keep in mind that some countries will have these registrations publicly available, and sometimes you will find a little bit more about, hey, who owns that drone? What is the drone about? What is it capable of? Because sometimes it's also very interesting to see if you can find a unmanned aircraft. What's the roundabout trip? How far can it fly? How much weight can it lift? For example, if you're in a conflict area, it could be very interesting to understand if a certain drone is capable of releasing a certain kind of explosive or something else, or maybe contraband and those kind of things. So it can really be worthwhile to take a look at those databases as well. Now, what if we wanted to find more about an owner? What can we do? What are things that basically can be those pivot points? So if a plane is owned by someone or a company, that helps us understand that, hey, maybe now we can look in a company database, or we can do a people search engine lookup, just like the watchmyname.app tool that we talked about. So there are numerous ways for us to obtain information. But the next step would be is to find more information. So if we find an operator name or names, hey, that may lead us to Open Corporates, or that may lead us to another database. If we find an address, do not forget that we can simply look up an address on mapping tools like Google Maps, like Bing Maps, like Yandex Maps, like DuckDuckGo Maps. There are so many mapping tools out there that will tell us something about a specific address. And we can simply drop in those addresses in those search engines as well. And hopefully it will help us pivot and understand a little bit more about the persons or the company that own or operate those planes. Sometimes that will lead us to a specific website, a domain that contains information that, again, may give us a better understanding of, hey, what is this plane about? What is it doing? What's their core business? Or who is the owner? What's the owner all about? And, well, not uncommon, we may then find as well phone numbers and email addresses that could help us maybe find maybe even their social media accounts, because the owners may have used their phone numbers and email addresses to set up a vContacta account or a WhatsApp account, or maybe a Gmail account. And we can use that EPIOS tool that Alex Lotnick just talked about to maybe understand a little bit more about the email address that we obtained, that we can directly correlate to either the company that's owning that plane or the operator that's actually flying that plane. So again, can be really worthwhile to take a look at that information. Now, something that I think is good to understand, that there is a technique implemented in most planes, or if not all planes, that's called ADSB, which stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. It's basically a radio signal that communicates with satellites and GPS positioning to tell basically the world or air traffic control, hey, this is where the plane is coming from. This is where it's going. This is its current location. This is the altitude. This is the speed. So with that, those air traffic control towers all around the world can basically monitor the highway in the sky, if you may say so. It's so important for us to know when a plane disappears from that radar, because, well, there may be a malfunction. It may be shut down because, well, literally in my country, we have that horrific event called MH17, where over Ukraine, a plane was downed by most likely the Russians. That court session is now ongoing. So based upon tracking ADSB, we can in real time monitor information on airplanes based upon GPS positioning. Now, it's interesting, right? Because planes are everywhere. Sometimes planes fly in open sea, and in open sea, it's pretty hard for planes to communicate. So what they will also do is send forward that signal in open sea to the closest or nearest other plane until they can reach a ground station, for example, because it's pretty hard to reach a ground station in the middle of an ocean somewhere. So that's something that is interesting to know, because there may also be a little bit of lag. I experienced recently, there was a plane that fell out of the sky near Iran. And when you looked at the ADSB information, let's say it fell out of the sky around 6 o'clock. Interestingly, it disappeared from the map with ADSB tracking 4 minutes earlier, which means that that status update was not really in real time. There was an interval of several minutes between that. So that's something that you as an investigator may want to be aware of, that even though it's presented as to be real-time information, it does not always mean that ADSB information is in real time. Now let's talk a little bit about the unique hexadecimal codes that planes have attached to them. So aircraft all have those unique numbers that's basically issued to that plane as part of its unique registration. And we can use those unique codes to track a specific aircraft. So in this case, those pieces of information are collected by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. So they associate those unique transponder codes for you to take a look at something. So for example, if you want to find something about a plane in the Netherlands, you wanted to look at that unique code in the Dutch database. If you want to look at something coming from Canada, that we see in this example, you want to go to that international local database. Now, what's harder is that military aircrafts, they operate outside of that ICAO system. So they will have those designated MODES hexadecimal unique IDs, but they can turn it off because, well, you get the idea, right? Sometimes when you're a military plane, you need to do some stealth stuff without being immediately detected. So they have other means. They do have those official numbers, but it's sometimes a little bit challenging to find that information. If you want to know a little bit more, I would like to encourage you to look at the icao.int page. That can give you a little bit more information on how this technique works and how this unique numbering plans work. Now, when it comes to uniqueness in planes, we will also see that every aircraft will have its unique call sign. So sometimes those pilots need to communicate. So they need to identify themselves through a radio signal. So for civil aircrafts, they are most commonly based upon their registration number. Now, military planes do not always follow this system because they do not receive those civil registration numbers. But if we take a look at this example, we can also see sometimes they are in a sort of order. So if we take a look at this, the entry number 4 and 3 that start with Sting 12 and Sting 13, that tells us a little bit about, hey, there may be some numbering in here. It's always spelled out in NATO, a phonetic alphabet. So you will hear someone talk through a radio. So maybe you can find a RTL SDR radio interception tool online that will give you the opportunity to listen in to what maybe a civil aviation air tower can hear when someone calls to port, if you may say so, because it's very common for a pilot before they take off that they ask permission through those radios. But before they do that, they need to basically identify themselves. So they will say, hey, this is my call sign. Well, they will not say this is my call sign, but they will say, hey, this is DKOWL, and then spelled in NATO. They will tell what they are doing. Do I have permission to take off, or do I have permission to land? And if so, what landing strip can I land? And if you have distress signals, they can all use that based upon that unique call sign. And again, that may be something that you want to take a look at, because that may give you that better understanding of what that plane is about. Now, I told you before that we can track aircrafts. So there are numerous websites out there that can give us live and or historical tracking of aircrafts. So including mapping and other capabilities for you to learn more about maybe that aircraft of interest. So the tracking is 9 out of 10 times, well, let's say 10 out of 10 times based upon those radio transmissions that are coming from ADSB. But other data, as long as those hex IDs that I just talked about, can be found on these particular web pages. Now, on this slide, you will see a couple of resources. And again, for me, this is in any particular order. I do not have a favorite. My favorite one is the one that gives me the information that I'm looking for. So that answers my intelligence requirement or my research question. So you can take a look at ADSB Exchange, FlightAware, FlightRadar24.com, OpenSky-Network, Planefinder.net, RadarBox, you name it. Keep in mind that they promise 9 out of 10 times global coverage, but it really depends on where they have their receiver set up, because very often they are reliant on other people in the community, if you may say so, that set up antennas that are capable of intercepting those radio signals coming from those ADSB transmissions, for example. So what can we expect from tools like these on, for example, their mapping view? So here we have an example where we can see literally all kinds of pieces of interesting information. So this is coming from adsbexchange.com. And we, in this case, are interested in tracking a particular plane, but we can very well click any other plane on the map. So in this case, we select the plane pointed out at 1. On the left-hand side, we will see that it will give us details about the plane. It will give us a picture. It will give us information about the registration number. It will give us information what kind of plane it is, in this case, a military plane. We can see the average speed. We can see the altitude. We can see the longitudes. We can see the position based on X and Y coordinates. So all kinds of interesting pieces of information that may help you understand better where that plane is coming from. And we can literally see on the map a route or at least a path that plane took so far. So really, really interesting information. Keep in mind that we can literally click any other aircraft on this map, and then immediately our view will change to that particular plane. I think this is really cool, and 9 out of 10 times these resources are free. Now, what happens if you start paying for these things? So I have some subscriptions to some of these resources that are paid. And the pricing may vary from a couple of dollars a month to several hundreds a year. What will you get? 9 out of 10 times you will get either a little bit more information or historical information and or upcoming information about the particular aircraft of interest. So it may sometimes in certain cases be worthwhile to look at the historical records, because then you can understand a little bit more. So let me tell you a practical example. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to do an investigation because people of a different company were scared that there was some kind of merger between two competitive companies was coming up. So basically they asked me, can you start monitoring the planes that those companies own and the planes that those, let's say those CEOs that are very wealthy of their company, those private jets that they own. So all I did is I was starting to monitor if two planes were in the exact same place at the same day. So if they both landed, for example, on Amsterdam Schiphol Airport or maybe LAX, now at least I knew that those planes landed on the same day on the same airport. And then next to that, I can do some additional pivoting, maybe looking at their social media accounts, maybe looking at other information on the internet that can tell me a little bit more that maybe those high-placed figures were meeting each other somewhere to maybe discuss a merger about that company. So that could be a practical use case, for example, to look at the information like that. Now, what we can do, we can also look for that specific aircraft. So if we know already that tail number, we do not look, we have no need to look on that map, because we can simply drop in that tail number or that alphanumeric hex ID number, and it will, of course, if it's indexed in those tools that I just pointed out, it will show us those additional information. So sometimes owner data, definitely not always, where it's coming from, where it's going through, maybe a current picture of that plane, maybe an estimated speed and altitude and longitude. So that is my suggestion when it comes to open source intelligence. And that's generally not, that's not even needed for only aviation OSINT. Always start with what you know. And hopefully that will lead you to information that you do not know yet, or that you're not aware about, that you can corroborate, that addresses and answers that intelligence requirement that you have been raised. So start with what you know and use those search boxes that all those aviation aircraft resources have available for you. For example, you could find historical flight data. So here we have historical flight data coming from a private owner or of a jet from a Beech 1900D jet, which shows literally on what date it took off and where it landed. And we can see the flight time, we can see all kinds of interesting information. So that may give us information on, again, hey, what is this plane about? Where is it coming from? Where is it going to? And why do we maybe have certain gaps? Because we can see certain patterns. So every Monday, maybe that plane takes off and lands somewhere, and they do that consistently for weeks and months. And now all of a sudden, we see a change in behavior. That by itself could be an entire new open source intelligence investigation. What's going on? Is the aircraft out for maintenance, or did things change? Did they turn off that transponder, that ADSB transponder? So there could be numerous reasons why we want to dive into historical flight data. So if we take a look at an example here, we can see that they will only fly, most of these tools will only do it for recent information. But here we see an example coming from Ryanair, its plane, that it landed over a week ago at a certain location. And we can literally see, hey, it took off here in Athens, Greece, and it now went to Minsk in Belarus. We can see the exact flight path. And we can see, again, the airspeed, times of flight, and sometimes even more details about the owner. So if this was a private owner, maybe an oligarch, that could be interesting to take a look at from an open source intelligence perspective. Now, let's say we tie it back again to that example that Christina Licati, for example, talked about, that she needed to protect a high value, high placed figure. So what if we know the tail number of that high placed figure? And now by looking up maybe an aircraft in a database, and we can see, hey, next week that plane is taking off from that location and it's landing there, and I may be a criminal or a bad individual that want to hurt that individual. Now I literally know where I need to go to at least find the city and or the airport where those persons may be. So from that perspective, that can be very interesting to take a look at future flights from any aircraft. Now, there are some other things that I think are undervalued when it comes to open source intelligence. So there are a lot of people out there that have that side hobby that are really into spotting something that can fly. And with that, we now have a new opportunity, because if people spot planes and they use the cameras that they have nowadays, we may have high quality pictures of any aircraft. So here we see a helicopter, we see planes, we can see military planes or aircrafts, we can see civil aircrafts, we can see private aircrafts, and so on, from different angles in high quality. And we can literally see when they uploaded the photo, when they spotted that particular aircraft at a specific location, anywhere around the world. So it's really worthwhile to look at those plane spotting resources like airfleets.net, planespotters.net, jetphotos.com, planelist.net, Aviation DB, and scramble.nl. So there are numerous resources out there that you may want to check out that are not, let's say, from official sources, so official databases that are owned and maintained by governments, but simply by people that are enthusiasts that love to watch anything that can fly, and as soon as they spot it, they will take a picture or sometimes even a video, and we can now make our assessment to see, hey, what is this plane about? When was it spotted? Where was it spotted? Maybe was it spotted alongside with another plane of interest in the same location again? So numerous reasons to find information by looking at plane spotter websites. Now, it's also interesting, of course, to know what people are actually operating or flying that plane. So the pilots and other people that basically are on planes may be in a database. So there are some resources out there that require registration with civil authorities. So if the information is public, you may find information about a certain person that is capable of flying a certain make and model an aircraft. And with that, again, it gives us great opportunity to pivot into places where we can potentially find more about that specific pilot, maybe on their social media, maybe on forums, maybe on other blog posts. So there is a great searchable database for you when we can find information about registered airmen. That's at Aviation DB. So that's mostly for English-speaking countries, but you will find some of these other resources in other regions of the world as well. For example, for India, you have fipindia.com/members, and you will find a database for that region. And there are some other countries that will provide you with the same thing. Now, lastly, what I think is super cool, and that's a thing that really has to do with the SANS SEC587 Advanced Open Source Intelligence Gathering and Analysis course, is that we try to take open source intelligence to the next step. So we try to automate stuff. We try to write our own code to maybe monitor a certain aircraft or monitor a specific region in the world. And as soon as an aircraft enters that region, we want to be notified about that. With that, we can make use of APIs, for example, so application programming interfaces. So the Open Sky Network is a free resource which provides you with ADSB data and provides an API. So what can we get? Well, we can get that unique ICAO number. We can get the call sign. We can get the originating country. We can see the current time and position. We can see the latitude, longitude. So all kinds of pieces of information that I already talked about today, but now from an API perspective. And with that, we find very interesting information. Now, normally, at this moment in class at the SEC587, we would stop and we would have a lab, which means that you as a student in class will do a awesome, or at least I'm a little bit biased here, a awesome hands-on exercise that makes you put to practice the things that we discuss in class. But hey, sadly enough, we don't have time for that right now. So if you have questions, I'll be around the entire day, so you can pop in my hallway in the Slack channel. If you want to learn more about the course, you can view the syllabus at the URL that you now see on your screen. For now, I would like to thank you for your attention for this particular course demo and my talk. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of today's SANS Osint Summit.